Hello everyone, and welcome to Part 3 of CSS Level 1. A major part of what we've seen so far has revolved around the idea of CSS selectors, where selectors in general are used to target HTML elements that we want to style. So far, we've only approached the idea of selecting HTML elements by their tag, so grab all paragraph tags or grab all list tags. But what if we only want to select subsets or select a single element? That is where we can use selectors to clarify exactly what elements we want in the HTML. We can use IDs to target single elements, and we can use classes to target groups of elements, and then we can also use a wide variety of combinations of selector tags to target certain combinations of elements, things such as descendants or adjacent siblings, and we're going to talk a lot more about that. So let's jump right in to show how this all works. Alright, so here I have an HTML called part3.html, and it's linked to part3_master.css. And in the body of this HTML, I'm going to add some content. I'll add a heading 3 that says, I'm a h3 heading, and then I'm going to add some divs. And now when it says class, remember it auto-completes class, I'm going to actually add some classes to this. So we'll call this first div class. And we'll put a paragraph in here that says, I'm inside the first div class. That way we can see what's going on when we actually begin to style these. Then I will add another division container, and we'll call this second div. And in a paragraph, we'll write, I'm inside the second div class. And then we'll add a little bit more. I'm going to add a paragraph. And with this paragraph, we're going to add an ID to it. So we'll add an ID, and we're going to set it equal to singled out. And in this paragraph, we'll say IDs must be unique. Then we're going to make another heading 3 that says, here's a list. And you can also just copy and paste this from the part3.html if you don't want to type it all out yourself. And we'll have an unordered list. Li will say something like confirm. You can write whatever really text you want in here. And then Li will say something like feedback, question mark. And inside of these list elements, we're also going to add inputs. So this first input is going to just be a checkbox input. And the second input is going to be a text. So a checkbox, really similar to a radio button that we've seen earlier, except in our case, it's actually just a checkbox that you've probably seen before online. And then another list, we're going to drop an anchor tag here, and we'll give an href to a website. This website will be my website, pyreandata.com, and we'll say pyreandata. I know this is a lot of content, so feel free to pause or just copy and paste from the notes, and then we'll put another anchor tag here that has an href of some other website. Let's just say npr.org, or you can put any news website you want here, or really any website. We'll say that's NPR. All right, lots of stuff here, so let's break it down real quick. Let's refresh this to make sure everything's linked, expand it a bit. All right, so right now I have this h3 heading, something that's inside the first div class, something that's inside the second div class. Let me make sure I spelled that correctly. Refresh this. And then IDs must be unique. There's our ID. We have here is a list, confirm with a checkbox on it that we can click on and off. Feedback with some text input here. Then two links here, pyreandata and NPR. All right. We have all of this, so now let's jump to CSS and actually talk about how we can link to this. So notice here I have classes and then my IDs. So if I come to my CSS and I say something like div, and I specify the color of all divs to be red, and then I come back here and I refresh this, no matter where the div is, no matter what class it is, as long as it has the tag div, it's going to be the color red. So first div becomes red, second div becomes red. Normally, however, you don't want to affect every single tag that has div. You want to select subsets. In that case, we can use these classes that we assigned. So I can select first div or second div instead of selecting everything that's inside any div. And that's the key to using classes. Now what you can't do with a class is just say first div and then color something blue. Otherwise, if I refresh this, notice no change occurs. When you're dealing with a class, you tell CSS that it's a class through a dot. So classes always start with a dot or a period. So now if I save this, refresh over here, I can see that I'm inside the first div class has now become blue. And likewise, I can grab the second div and color that red. Refresh this, and I can see now inside the first div class, inside the second div class are their own individual colors. So this is a very common tool to use. And this is where we're getting into the idea of selectors. So for classes, they always start with this dot or this period. Okay, now we noticed that we also had an ID. And for IDs, you want an ID to be unique. It just is attached to a single element, versus classes can be attached to multiple elements. So for an ID, it's usually just a single element. Classes can be across multiple divisions, multiple containers, multiple paragraphs, etc. Classes use a hashtag. So shift number 3, there's a hashtag there, and then we put in the name of the class, which in our case was singled out. And we can see that also the syntax highlighting tells you, oh, you're dealing with a class here. So let me double check that it's singled out. There it is. And let's change this something to color, let's say green. And let's also give it something called a text decoration. So text decoration, I'm just going to kind of throw this in. These are things such as overlines, underlines, or like a strike through, a line through. So we'll give that a line through. Save it. Let's refresh. We can see here, we see IDs must be unique is now the color green, and it also has a line through. So they were kind of just throwing in a little 2-in-1, both how to use IDs and the fact that you can use text decorations as another property. And you can always use the CSS references in the notes for various properties if you're looking for them. Another common thing, actually not common, sorry, is the asterisk. The asterisk is a selector for selecting every element on the page. So if I say color every element, and then let's say black, I save this and refresh, it's going to color everything black, and it's going to override certain things. It won't override IDs, but you can see here that it's overriding these class calls. This asterisk call tries to override as much as it can over all the elements. A quick note though, this is actually very uncommon. You usually don't want to just call everything like this. Maybe if you want something like a background, but it's usually pretty uncommon to just call an asterisk there. Although I do want you to be aware that you can use an asterisk to select all the elements in the HTML. However, they'll be overridden if they have a particular ID. Alright, finally, I want to discuss a few different types of selectors. You can check out the links in the actual CSS file if you're interested in more of these, and I have the link open here in another tab. But basically, here is a CSS selector reference, and you can actually call elements on many types of selectors. So there's a huge list here of the various types of selectors, and I want to show you a few examples of the more common ones. So far we've seen things like class, like dot class, hashtag ID, asterisk to select all the elements, and then certain elements like just calling the element tag. Alright, so let's show an example of one of those CSS selectors known as adjacent siblings, and that has to do with elements that are next to each other. Let's imagine that I wanted to select all unordered list items that are next to an H3, a heading 3. I would do this. I'd say heading 3, and then I use the plus operator. Unordered list, curly braces, and then whatever property I wanted. So let's give them a border, and we can do border, border style, and border thickness all in one line. So instead of saying, like we've done before, border color, and then border width, and then border style, I can actually just call border by itself, pass in a thickness, so let's give it 4 pixels, then give it a style, let's say it's the dotted style, and then give it a color, let's give it purple. And that's kind of a quicker, nicer way to create borders. So we'll save this, refresh our page here, and now I can see that any unordered list that is next to an H3 now has this border. So that's known as adjacent siblings. And you can always reference here on the links in the CSS file for the notes, the various different types of CSS selectors. So in our case, This plus basically says select all unordered list elements that are placed immediately after an H3. Okay, there are two more CSS selectors that I want to cover for this lecture, and one of them is known as descendants, and the other one is for attributes. So for descendants, it basically looks like this. If we want to grab all anchor tags that are inside a list, you just put a space between them. So all anchor tags inside of a list, and then we can affect them. So let's give them a color. Let's say something like red, semicolon there, refresh our page. And we can see now that any anchor tag that's inside a list now has the color red. And then the last one I want to show you is how to actually affect attributes. So let's say we want to go further than this and actually grab any anchor tag inside of a list with a particular href, an actual link. Then I can use square brackets for this and say href here equal to www. Let's go with the last one, which was npr.org, or whatever website you happen to put in there. We'll give it a color. Let's just give it the color something like blue. And let's give it a border. So let's practice using that border again. Remember, you just give it a thickness, such as 5 pixels. The style, let's give it the style solid, and then some color. Let's give it orange. Save this. Refresh our page, and we can see now we've selected any anchor tag with this particular href inside of a list and change its color and its border. Alright, so that's really all there is for these particular CSS selectors. Throughout the course, the most common ones we're going to be dealing with are really class selectors and ID selectors. While we will show various things such as adjacent siblings or descendants, attributes, etc., these throughout our course are going to be less commonly used just because we won't be really focusing on those type of minute details while we're learning. We will really more focus on classes and IDs. So make sure you really know these two types. Dot for classes, hashtag for IDs. Okay, and if you ever want to reference the various other types of CSS selectors, just open up the CSS file and it has links to these CSS reference selector pages. Thanks everyone, and I'll see you at the next lecture.